I never thought of myself as the kind of person who scared easily. I grew up in a noisy part of Chicago, surrounded by honking horns, yelling neighbors, and the constant hum of the L train. By the time I turned 30, I told myself I had earned some quiet. So when I found a small place on the outskirts of a sleepy Midwestern town, old, affordable, tucked between tall pines, I didn't hesitate. I liked the house the moment I stepped inside. Sure, the floors creaked and the basement smelled like wet concrete, but the kitchen had a big window overlooking the backyard, and the office upstairs caught the morning sun just right. My realtor told me the house had sat empty for almost a year, but she didn't get into why. I didn't press. I was too busy convincing myself that this move meant a fresh start. New job, new town, new habits. I imagined quiet mornings and long evenings where the only sound was the wind moving across the yard. Winter arrived early that year, heavier than I was used to, but the isolation didn't bother me, not at first. I liked the crisp, cold mornings, the way the frost formed lace patterns on the windows, the eerie calm when snow blanketed the street. I liked the silence, but silence has a way of amplifying everything else. By the time December came around, I was settling into a routine. Work late, brew too much coffee, stare out my office window at the dull glow of the street lamp across from my house. That night, the night everything changed, the storm was louder than usual. The kind of storm where the wind didn't just whistle, it pressed against the house like it wanted to come inside. I had no idea something else already had. It was just past 1:30 a.m. when I first saw the light, not the street lamp. Something smaller, thinner, moving in a slow arc along the fence line. At first I thought it was a trick of the snow, but the movement was too steady, too intentional. Someone was out there. I leaned closer to the window, trying to figure out which neighbor would be wandering through my backyard during a storm like this. There weren't many homes nearby, and none close enough for someone to accidentally walk onto my property. The beam suddenly jerked upward, straight at my window. I stumbled back, heart pounding so hard the sound of it drowned out the wind. The light hovered for a few seconds, like the person holding it was deciding something. And then, just as abruptly, it disappeared. I tried to shake off the dread tightening around my chest. Maybe it was a utility worker, I told myself. Maybe someone checking on a busted pipe or a fallen branch. But the storm raged harder, making excuses harder to cling to. Around 2 a.m., the house began popping and cracking in ways that didn't feel natural. Not random expansions or contractions. These were deliberate rhythms, like footsteps testing each wooden plank. I held my breath and listened. Then something slammed downstairs. Not a thud, a slam. Sharp enough to rattle the picture frames. I grabbed my flashlight and started down the stairs. Halfway down, every light in the house died at once. Not flickered. Died. Total darkness fell so thick I couldn't see the steps below my feet. The storm couldn't have killed the power that fast. Not like that. Somewhere below, just barely audible over the storm, someone breathed. Slow and steady. That was the moment I knew I wasn't alone. I stayed frozen on the staircase, gripping the rail so tight my knuckles hurt. The sound from below wasn't the house settling. It wasn't the wind. It was breathing. Controlled. Intentional. Human. My throat tightened as I tried not to make noise. Then something brushed against the bottom steps. A hand. I could hear the faint slide of skin on wood, like someone guiding themselves up the stairs one careful inch at a time. I moved backward, step by silent step, until my heel touched the landing. I slipped into my bedroom and crouched behind the bed. My heart felt like it was punching through my ribs. The darkness didn't help. It felt like the whole house had been swallowed. I heard the intruder move with unsettling familiarity. Whoever it was knew the stairs, knew which parts creaked and which didn't. They ascended slowly, confidently, as if they'd climbed these stairs 1,000 times. When they reached the top, they paused. I clamped my hand over my mouth, praying they couldn't hear me breathing. The floorboard outside my bedroom door whispered under their weight. They were right there. I waited for the doorknob to turn, for the door to swing open, for a face, any face, to appear. But it didn't happen. Instead, they kept walking, their steps directed toward the other end of the hallway, toward my office. Why the office? Why go straight there? Something clicked inside me then. They weren't searching. They were following a route, a memorized path. This wasn't a random break-in. This was someone who knew the layout of my house. When the intruder disappeared into the office, I crawled, barely breathing, toward the window. I forced it open, feeling the icy air slice across my face. My bare feet hit the snow, sending shocks of pain up my legs, but I didn't stop. I sprinted to my car, jumped in, and peeled out onto the street. Only when I reached the end of the block did I call 911. By the time officers arrived, snow had already filled my footprints in the yard. I met them near my driveway, shivering in thin pajamas. 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing against the storm like blue ghosts. Inside, the house felt colder than the outside air. The officers swept room by room, and I stood frozen in the doorway, afraid to step back inside. One of them returned after a few minutes, his jaw tight. "Who else has a key?" he asked. "No one," I said. "I live alone." "Well," he said, "someone was comfortable enough in here to walk straight to your fuse box." He led me to the basement door. The fuse panel hung open, every switch flipped off manually. There were muddy footprints on the concrete floor, long strides, confident ones, not the clumsy path of someone unfamiliar with the dark. Upstairs, they found more footprints. They traced a direct line from the staircase to my office. On my desk, the officer pointed to something I hadn't seen before. A smudge. A fingerprint on my computer monitor. Like someone had touched it while leaning in close. Then came the worst discovery. Footprints led from my office to my bedroom door. They stopped there. The officer turned to me. "You said you were hiding in the room?" I nodded. "He stood here," the officer said quietly. "Right outside the door. For a while, judging by the prints." My stomach twisted. That meant he'd known exactly where I was. Maybe he had been deciding whether to come in. One officer found something else. A set of faint boot tracks outside leading to the backyard fence. They vanished into the snow beyond. "Looks like he left on foot," another officer said. "Whoever he is, he didn't panic. Didn't rush." Of course he didn't. He knew the house better than I did, and that was the detail that never stopped haunting me. The police asked the usual questions. Had I noticed anything missing? Had I seen suspicious people in the neighborhood? But I kept circling back to the same thought. How did he know the house so well? The next morning, after the storm finally eased, an officer returned with information. "We did some digging," he said. "Your house was owned by a man named Carter Hayes before the bank foreclosed on it. He disappeared a year ago. Locals said he was off, spent most of his time alone, had a reputation for watching people." "Watching people?" I repeated, uneasy. "He didn't like that the house was taken from him," the officer continued. "We think he may have been coming back, maybe more than once." The idea that someone had been slipping in and out before I moved in made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the little things clicked. The occasional draft, the feeling of being watched in my own office, the mysterious scratches on the basement door, the faint smell of cologne I could never explain. Maybe he'd been inside the night before. Maybe he'd been inside many nights before. The officer tried to reassure me, but what comfort could he offer? They hadn't found him. I doubted they ever would. And every creak, every shift in the house afterward made my pulse jump. I moved out 2 weeks later, left behind more than furniture, left behind the version of myself who believed quiet places were safe. Now I check every lock twice. I sleep with lights on, and every winter storm reminds me of the man who knew my home in the dark, and who walked its halls like he still owned it. I don't think he came to steal anything. I think he came to see who had taken his place. No matter how peaceful a place seems, never ignore your instincts. Safety isn't just about locked doors. It's about being aware, cautious, and trusting the quiet warnings your mind gives you before danger becomes visible. I've always believed that starting over requires a clean break, but I never expected mine to take the shape of a small 1960s rental sitting on the outskirts of Duluth. After my breakup with Matt, loud, messy, and the kind that leaves your pride scattered across 3 counties, I wanted quiet. Real quiet. So when my coworker mentioned her aunt's old place available for cheap, I didn't hesitate. The house wasn't pretty in any modern sense. Faded yellow siding, a sagging porch step, and windows with stubborn drafts. But it had privacy, and that was enough. My dog, Hank, a heavy German Shepherd mix, adjusted faster than I did. He liked the big fenced yard and the quiet gravel road that wound through leafless trees. Most nights I'd sit on the couch with a blanket and a mug of peppermint tea, letting the silence feel like healing instead of punishment. By January, the cold settled in for good. Duluth cold isn't polite. It squeezes itself into the seams of your jacket and takes your breath away. Still, the house felt like a place I could rebuild myself, slowly, piece by piece. I didn't tell many people how lonely I really was, how the nights stretched long, how the breakup still replayed in my head like a bad movie. But there was something strangely comforting about the creaks and groans of an older home settling against the winter wind. It felt lived in, familiar, safe, even. I believed that right up until the Tuesday night when the furnace stopped. The hallway went dark, and every quiet thing in that house decided to become something else entirely. It was just after 11 when it happened. I was wrapped in my worn fleece blanket, half watching a true crime documentary I'd already seen twice, when the furnace cut out mid-cycle. Not powered down, stopped. The sudden silence hit like a slap. Even Hank lifted his head, ears high, eyes alert. Probably the filter again, I muttered, trying to sound casual. But Hank didn't buy it. He stood up on the couch, rigid, staring down the hallway like he'd spotted something I couldn't. Then he growled, low, steady, the kind that vibrates through the floorboards. "Hank, hey, it's fine." It wasn't. I muted the TV and listened. The house ticked and settled like always, until I heard it. A soft shuffle, like someone dragging a bare foot across carpet fibers. Slow, deliberate. Cold prickled the back of my neck. I waited for a second sound, hoped I had imagined it. Then it came again, followed by a drawn-out exhale. Too human to be the furnace and too close to ignore. I grabbed my phone and tried calling my sister. The call failed. Tried again. Failed. My service bars flashed full, then suddenly dropped to 0. No service. "What is happening?" I whispered, more to myself than anything. The hallway darkened unnaturally, shadows stretching in ways shadows shouldn't. Then I saw it, a faint pale glow near the far bedroom, low to the ground, about ankle height. It moved, slow and steady, turning the carpet fibers silver as it slid forward. Hank backed into me, trembling. That was when every instinct in my body screamed, "Someone is here who shouldn't be." I took a step back, bumping into the edge of the coffee table. My breath caught as the glow brightened, outlining what looked like bare feet. Long, narrow, unnaturally pale. Above them, the hem of something fabric. A nightgown, maybe. Something old-fashioned. "Hello?" My voice cracked. "Who's there?" No answer, just the whisper of fabric brushing carpet. I retreated toward the front door, keeping my eyes fixed on the hallway. My fingers fumbled at the deadbolt. It jammed halfway, like something inside the mechanism resisted. Come on," I whispered through clenched teeth. Then a whisper drifted toward me. Soft, tired, heartbreakingly close. "You're in my room." Every hair on my arms rose. I yanked the deadbolt again. It didn't move. Behind me, Hank barked. Sharp. Panicked. Nothing like his usual bark. I spun around just long enough to shove my shoulder against the door. The metal finally gave way with a clunk, and icy air rushed inside. I didn't think. I ran, barefoot into the snow, cold biting instantly into my skin. Hank bolted beside me, both of us slipping down the porch steps. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with the keys, crying without realizing. Behind us, the house stood dark except for that faint glow still floating halfway down the hall. I got the engine started and tore down the driveway, gravel popping under the tires, adrenaline drowning every thought except go. I didn't stop until I reached the bright fluorescent safety of a gas station on the highway. Only then did I let myself breathe and start shaking all over. The night clerk took one look at my bare feet and called the police before I even finished explaining. Hank sat pressed against my leg, still trembling, still staring at the doorway as if he expected something to follow us. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. Officer Keller, tall and soft-spoken, asked me to walk him through everything. I'll never forget how he paused when I said the words bare footsteps and whisper. Not disbelief. Concern. You didn't see a face? He asked. No, just the bottom half. And the glow. He exchanged a look with his partner, a quick, subtle glance that unsettled me more than I expected. All right, we'll go check the house. You stay here with the clerk. Watching their cruiser lights disappear into the snowy dark felt like handing over my last bit of courage. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stop shaking. Hank whined softly, resting his head in my lap. It felt like an hour before they returned, though the clock said 20 minutes. Officer Keller stepped inside with snow dusted across his shoulders. There's no intruder, he said gently. All doors locked. No signs of forced entry. My stomach dropped. But I heard. No, I saw. I believe you heard something. He hesitated. But there was one thing we did find. My heart hammered painfully. What? He pulled off his gloves, voice low. Footprints. Wet ones. Human-shaped, but not right. Not right how? Too long. Too narrow. And the temperature in that hallway was 20 degrees colder than the rest of the house. I went cold all over. So what do I do? He looked at me with a softness I didn't expect. You don't go back there tonight. Maybe don't go back at all. I stayed at a motel that night, Hank curled beside me like a living shield. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale glow sliding toward me, heard the whisper telling me I was in her room. By morning, the police had arranged for me to collect my things in daylight, with an officer escorting me. I felt embarrassed needing the help, but the moment we stepped inside, I knew I couldn't have done it alone. The hallway carpet was still damp in distinct footprints, long, narrow, arched strangely, almost like someone who had never quite learned to walk right. The air temperature dipped with every step we took toward the bedrooms. Officer Keller watched me pack. You're making the right call, he said. This house has history. What kind of history? He hesitated, then sighed. Former tenant died here. Woman in her 70s. Lived alone. She was confused near the end. Used to wander at night, thinking people were in her room. She passed in the hallway. I felt a chill seep into my spine. She wasn't dangerous, he added. Just lost, confused. But sometimes these old places hold on to things. I nodded, throat tight. I don't think she meant to scare you, he finished. But staying here won't help you heal. He was right. Moving out felt like reclaiming something. My safety, my sanity, my future. I found a new place within 2 weeks, a sunny apartment downtown where Hank naps by the window and the walls don't whisper at night. I never drove back down that gravel road again. When life forces you to start over, trust your instincts, even the fearful ones. Safety isn't just about locking doors. It's about recognizing when a place, situation, or person no longer supports your peace. Walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's survival. I've always loved winter road trips. There's something peaceful about being alone on an open highway with nothing but engine noise and the radio crackling its way through static. But last December, peace was the last thing I found. I'd been driving from Washington to Idaho to spend Christmas break with my cousin. Finals had drained me, and the idea of a quiet week away from campus sounded perfect. By the time I hit rural Idaho, snow had swallowed the road so completely that the landscape turned into one endless white blur. The painted lines were gone, the guardrails looked like vague shadows, and my wipers had been fighting for their lives for hours. I slid twice on black ice, full sideways skid, each one sending a jolt of adrenaline that made my hands shake for minutes afterward. I told myself I'd pull off at the next gas station or rest stop, but those things become rare once you're deep enough into nowhere. I was starting to wonder if I'd misjudged the route entirely when a flickering neon sign materialized through the snow. Starlight Diner, the S half dead, the light buzzing like a mosquito. Civilization, or at least heat and coffee. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet for a place meant to be a safe stop. A young cook leaned against the counter cleaning a knife that didn't look dirty. A woman in her late 30s poured coffee like she needed it more than oxygen. A pale, thin man sat in the booth furthest from the door, his eyes fixed on the windows rather than the room. No music played, no television, just the hum of the neon outside. Something about their silence made me pause, but exhaustion won out, and I took a seat, praying the warmth would clear my head. I had no idea what waited in that storm outside. For the first 10 minutes, nobody talked. The cook muttered a half-hearted "evening," and the woman gave me a soft, nervous smile as she topped off my mug. But the man in the back booth, he didn't even acknowledge me. Pale face, hollow cheeks, unmoving. His hands rested on the table like they were bolted in place. I tried to shake off the tension. People get weird during storms, I told myself. Maybe they were worried about the roads or power outages. Still, the quiet pressed hard on my nerves. After a while, the woman finally said, "Rough out there, huh?" "Like driving through milk," I joked weakly. The cook chuckled without humor. "Storm like this, you should have stopped earlier. Folks get stranded out here." The pale man never moved, didn't sip his coffee, didn't blink much. He only stared at the windows like he was waiting for someone to appear. I tried not to stare, but he made it impossible. Every minute or so, his neck twitched. Just a small movement, but enough to make my stomach flip. Then a trucker stepped in, stomping the snow off his boots. "Hell of a storm," he said. "You folks know if there's a motel nearby?" The pale man's head jerked at the sound, and he stood up so fast his chair screeched across the floor. He didn't speak, didn't look at anyone except the trucker, and then he walked out the front door. No coat, no payment, no hesitation. "What the hell?" I whispered. The cook let out a long breath, his shoulders dropping like he'd been holding them tense for hours. "Thank God," he muttered. The woman shot him a warning look. I didn't understand their reaction then. I would soon. 20 minutes passed. The trucker finished his coffee, thanked the woman, and pulled his coat tight before heading back outside. He'd barely closed the door when the woman frowned. She kept glancing out the window, chewing her lip. "Something wrong?" I asked. "It's nothing," she said, though her eyes said otherwise. Another 5 minutes crawled by. Then she suddenly set her mug down and rushed outside. Through the window, I saw her run into the swirling snow and disappear behind the corner of the building. A few seconds later, she stumbled back inside, face pale as the frost on the windows. "His truck," she whispered to the cook. "Is still there. Both doors open. His footprints stop at the trees." A heavy silence fell. The cook swallowed, jaw clenching. Without a word, he walked to the back hall and quietly turned the deadbolt on the rear exit. The metallic clunk echoed through the diner. "Hey," I said, standing. "What's going on?" The cook didn't look at me. "Storm's bad. Don't want the wind blowing the door open." That was a lie. Even I could hear it. The woman wrapped her arms around herself, eyes darting toward the pitch-black windows. "He shouldn't have gone out alone," she murmured. "Storms bring out things." "What things?" I demanded. Before she could answer, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then everything dimmed to a dull glow. The cook cursed under his breath. "Fuse box again. I'll check it." He grabbed a flashlight and pushed open the storage room door. The beam disappeared inside, and he let the door swing shut behind him. The diner fell silent. 3 seconds later, pounding footsteps circled the building, heavy, erratic, fast, kicking up snow against every wall. The woman grabbed my arm. "Get away from the windows." She didn't need to tell me twice. A tall, thin silhouette drifted past the windows, head tilted, movements jerky and unnatural, as if its limbs didn't quite match the pace of its steps. The neon sign flickered behind it, outlining the shape in sickly purple light. The figure circled once, twice, slow enough to let us see it, slow enough to let us know it was choosing. The woman whispered, "It isn't the storm you have to worry about. Locals say he comes out when the roads shut down, follows travelers, watches for stranded ones." My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my teeth. "What about the trucker?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer. Another circuit around the diner. Then a scraping sound along the metal siding, like fingernails dragging. When the storage room door suddenly swung open, I jumped back. The cook was gone. His flashlight lay on the floor, still on, pointed toward the back exit, the same door he had locked minutes earlier. Snow blew in through a gap, the lock dangling useless from its hinge. "You wouldn't go outside?" the woman whispered. "Not him. Not now." A cold dread settled into my bones. Something had taken him. We backed into the restroom, the only room without windows, and shut ourselves inside. The woman held the door handle with both hands while I turned off the lights. For several minutes, something moved in the hallway. Slow, scraping, dragging movements against the walls. Then the gentle rattle of the bathroom doorknob. Once, twice. Then a long, deliberate pause. We didn't breathe. And then, silence. Hours passed like frozen molasses. When the storm finally eased near dawn, the woman whispered, "We have to go. Now." We cracked open the door, both of us trembling, and slipped into the hallway. The diner looked like a crime scene. Snow drifted through the back door, forming a small pile. Footprints, too long, too deep, trailed through the kitchen and then out into the forest. Not human, not natural. Outside, wind bit at our faces as we ran into the gray morning light. 3 vehicles sat abandoned in the lot. The trucker's rig, the cook's old sedan, and the pale man's station wagon. None had been touched. Snow had buried their windows. "Don't look at the trees," the woman warned. But I did. Halfway between the pines, a tall figure stood barely visible, head tilted, still as ice, watching. Police arrived an hour later. Their tracks filled the lot. Their radios crackled with disbelief. They searched the forest, combing through the snow until one officer shouted. A body, half buried near the tree line. Not the cook, not the trucker. The pale man. The officer said he'd been dead for hours. long before he had walked out of the diner. I didn't believe it then. I'm not sure I believe it now. The other two men were never found. Every winter since, the first snowfall brings back the memory of that silhouette drifting past the windows of the Starlight Diner, that quiet hum of the doorknob turning, that feeling of being watched, not by something human, but something patient, something that waits for storms, something that follows travelers. When your instincts tell you something is wrong, listen. Survival often depends less on courage and more on awareness, and knowing when to leave before danger steps out of the shadows. I picked up food delivery during winter break from college because textbooks don't pay for themselves and my car insurance was overdue. Again. Most nights were easy. Pizza runs, late-night tacos, suburban houses with glowing porch lights. Nothing special. But winter in my town hits hard. The kind of cold that makes your breath feel like broken glass. The kind of cold that makes people tip well because they know you're suffering. That night started normal enough, aside from the temperature dropping fast. 0 degrees, maybe lower with wind chill. My phone buzzed as I sat in a parking lot warming my hands over the car heater. It was a huge order. 4 entrees, 2 soups, 3 sides, from an address miles outside the main town. The payout made my eyebrows jump, enough to cover half my insurance bill. I accepted before I thought twice. The restaurant workers even joked about it. "Big family dinner?" one asked. "Or a party," another said. But something felt off about the address, just a set of coordinates more than a normal street. When I messaged the customer, he replied instantly, "Drive to the marked spot, you'll see the path." I brushed off the weirdness. Money is money. So I loaded the bags into my back seat and headed out. The drive took me through silent farmland, past fields frozen solid. The further I got, the darker it became. No houses, no barns, just forest swallowing both sides of the road. When my GPS announced I'd arrived, my headlights revealed nothing but a narrow path half buried in snow, vanishing into pitch-black trees. No driveway, no sign, not even a mailbox. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. I called the customer to confirm, mostly because I needed reassurance that I wasn't about to deliver dinner to a moose. He answered on the second ring. His voice was low, hoarse, and unsettlingly calm. "Yes, that's my driveway. Snow hides it every winter. Just walk in. House is close." "Close like 50 feet close?" I asked. A pause. "Just a short walk." Something in his tone made the hair on my neck stand straight. Still, the payout flashed in my mind like a neon sign. I grabbed the bags, pulled up my hood, and stepped into the woods. My phone flashlight carved out a thin, wavering tunnel through the dark. Every breath froze before it left my mouth. The world grew quieter with each step, as if the trees swallowed the sound. About 10 minutes in, I noticed prints in the snow ahead of me. Fresh ones. They weren't mine. The stride was long, too wide for a normal step. The tracks curved randomly, doubling back, circling trees. At one point they stopped completely, just vanished, then reappeared several feet away, angled toward me. That was when I heard a crunch behind me. I spun fast, light shaking in my hand. Nothing but trees. I convinced myself it was a falling branch or an animal. I kept walking faster now, gripping the food bags like they might protect me. But the path didn't reveal a house. No lights, no structure, not even a clearing. Just woods stretching endlessly. My chest tightened. The cold felt heavier. When my phone buzzed with a call failed notification, I realized I'd lost service. The trees closed in around me. Snow began drifting thicker. That was when I saw it, far ahead, a soft glow between the branches. A faint, wavering light like a lantern swaying in someone's hand. But the lantern didn't move like a hand would, and it was too tall. I tried calling the customer again out of instinct, hoping the signal might catch. The phone rang once, then cut off with a distorted crackle. The glow between the trees swayed gently, like someone breathing. I whispered to myself, "It's a porch light, just a porch light." But deep down I knew better. The light was wrong, too white, too steady, like reflection, not illumination. Then the glow blinked, not flickered. Blink, 2 points of light, 2 eyes. I didn't drop the food intentionally. My fingers simply went numb and the bags fell into the snow with a soft thud. I stepped back, barely breathing. The eyes tilted, following me. Then they rose, higher, stretching above human height. "Nope," I whispered. "Absolutely not." I turned and ran. Branches whipped against my jacket. Snow exploded beneath my feet. My phone beam jolted wildly, catching glimpses of tree trunks and drifting frost. Behind me, something moved, slow, heavy, dragging through deep snow. Not running, following. Every time I paused to catch my breath, the sound stopped too. The forest listened with me. At one point, the thing let out a low, crackling exhale, like cold wind passing through dry lungs. That pushed me into full panic. My visibility shrank to a tunnel of pixelated light from my half-frozen phone. My lungs burned. My legs felt like wet cement. The trees looked identical in every direction, and for a terrifying moment, I couldn't tell if I was going the right way. Then, faint but unmistakable, I saw the glow of my car headlights reflecting off the snow far through the trees. I ran harder, nearly slipping on a hidden stump, my pulse pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. But as I reached the edge of the woods, I saw something that froze me mid-stride. My passenger window was cracked open, and snow had been packed inside. My first thought wasn't fear, it was confusion. I always locked my car, even during quick drop-offs, especially in places like this. But the window sat open just enough for someone to reach inside. Snow covered the passenger seat like someone had pressed handfuls of it through the gap. I moved closer, heart thundering. That was when I noticed the front tire, shredded, not punctured, torn. Ribbons of rubber curled outward like something had clawed it. "It followed me out here," I whispered. Behind me, the dragging footsteps emerged from the woods again. Slow, intentional. I scrambled into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and turned the ignition. The engine roared like salvation. The slashed tire thumped and jerked, but the car lurched forward anyway. Branches scraped the sides as I accelerated wildly, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see what might be there. The road back toward town felt endless. The rim spat sparks on the ice, the steering wheel vibrated violently, and the car groaned with every second I forced it forward. But stopping was not an option. By the time I reached the gas station on the edge of town, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely dial the police. The clerk took one look at me and brought over a blanket without saying a word. When the officer arrived, he listened politely, but his expression was the same one adults use when kids talk about monsters under the bed. "Probably an animal," he said. "Cougars roam that area." "Cougars don't slash tires," I snapped. "Maybe you hit something." "And opened my window from the inside?" I asked. He had no answer to that. But the part that haunted me most came later. 3 days after the incident, I looked up the address again, half out of curiosity, half out of morbid dread. There was nothing. No house listed, no property, not even an empty lot. The pin dropped onto a blank patch of forest not owned by anyone, as if someone had placed it manually, guiding me to a void in the middle of nowhere. I tried calling the customer's number again. "Number not in service." I checked my order history. The receipt still existed, but the customer name field was blank. Delivery apps glitch sometimes, but not like that. I considered telling my parents, but what would I say? That glowing eyes chased me through the woods? That something too tall to be human followed my footprints? That someone or something waited in the dark for a stranger to walk far enough in. I still drive past that area sometimes, but never at night. Never in winter. Even during the day, there's something wrong about those woods. A stillness, a silence that feels like held breath. And every winter, when the first snow falls and the world goes quiet, I see it again in my mind. Those two pale glimmers between the trees. Not lantern light, not a flashlight. Eyes, watching me, waiting for someone else to follow a pin into the cold. Trust your instincts. No amount of money is worth walking into a situation your gut is screaming against. Safety is priceless, and the woods, the dark, and the unknown don't care how much you're being paid. People always say nothing happens in rural Indiana. That's partly why I agreed to house sit for my aunt. A quiet weekend in a peaceful town sounded like exactly what my brain needed after grinding through the winter semester. My aunt's place sat at the edge of an enormous cornfield, the kind that feels endless even in February when nothing's growing. Just rows of broken stalks poking through snow like brittle bones. I'd spent a lot of my childhood around this area, visiting during summers. Back then, the isolation felt magical, like I'd stepped outside normal life. Now, at 24, it felt more like a test. Could I handle being alone with nothing but wind and space? My aunt left early Friday morning for a work trip to Denver, giving me her usual list. Water the plants, bring in the mail, watch the thermostat. The house itself was modern. Big windows, clean lines, the kind of place that looked brighter on the inside than out. I settled in with a throw blanket, a mug of cocoa, and a determination to enjoy the quiet. The cold front hit around midnight. I could hear the wind forcing itself through the ventilation ducts like it was trying to come inside. By 1 a.m, I finished my movie and stretched, thinking about heading to bed. I remember feeling grateful for the warmth, grateful for being somewhere safe. That feeling didn't last long. It changed the moment I walked into the kitchen, flipped on the light, and saw the sliding glass door. The kitchen light hummed to life, and that's when I froze. The huge sliding door facing the backyard was fogged completely white, except for one small, perfectly clear circle at eye level, like someone had pressed their forehead directly against the glass just minutes earlier. I didn't move at first. My brain refused to make sense of it. I stepped closer, slow and careful. Smudges streaked down the glass beneath the clear circle, thin, uneven lines that looked disturbingly like finger trails. "Hank, did you do that?" I whispered, even though the only pet in the house was my aunt's old tabby cat, who couldn't reach that high even if she stacked kitchen chairs. I leaned in just enough to see my own reflection. The circle was too precise, too defined, as if someone had stood there for a long time, breathing against the window. Then the outside motion sensor lights snapped on, bathing the yard in harsh white. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to quiet my heartbeat long enough to see outside clearly. At first, nothing. Just snow swirling in the wind, the shed half buried behind a drift, the broken rows of corn stalks stretching into darkness. Then something shifted at the edge of the light. 2 figures. Tall, still, half hidden behind the shed, both staring in the direction of the house. I backed away so fast I hit the counter behind me. Okay. Call 911. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. The dispatcher's voice sounded far too calm when she told me officers were busy with storm-related accidents. "We'll send someone as soon as possible." I wasn't sure I had that long. I crouched behind the kitchen island, the cordless phone clutched to my chest like some kind of shield. The sliding door loomed ahead of me, the kitchen pitch dark except for the faint glow from the stovetop clock. I peeked out. One of the figures had moved. He stood at the edge of the patio now, maybe 10 yards away, tall and bundled in dark winter clothing. Hood up, hands at his sides. No flashlight, no phone, just watching. My breath fogged the air. "Please let the police get here soon. Please," I whispered, barely making a sound. The second figure remained by the shed, blocking the quickest path to the road. My stomach sank with the realization. They weren't just wandering. They were staging themselves. Then I heard it. A slow scraping sound from the front of the house, as if someone was dragging something across the siding. I crawled toward the hallway, my knees knocking against the hardwood floor. The entryway window was frosted over, but a shadow moved across it, tall, unmistakable. Someone was at the front door. The doorknob jiggled. My pulse slammed in my ears. I scrambled back toward the laundry room, the only space in the house with no exterior windows. I closed the door softly, praying the hinges wouldn't squeak. Outside, I heard tapping, windows being tested, soft thumps along the siding, footsteps circling. They moved with purpose, mapping the house from every angle. It felt like the walls were shrinking around me, like the quiet house I'd trusted had turned into a trap. And all I could do was wait. Those 15 minutes stretched into something indescribable, an empty, suffocating quiet punctuated by sounds that didn't belong. Slow footfalls on the deck, the rhythmic tapping on the sliding door, a low hum, like someone murmuring just outside the frame of the house, the kind of sounds that make your body react before your mind does. I held the cordless phone so tightly my knuckles ached. Every nerve in my body was begging to run, but there was nowhere safe to go. The men outside seemed to know every exit before I did. Then, through the howling wind, I heard something else. Distant at first, growing, sirens. The tapping stopped. Footsteps scuffled through snow. Multiple sets, fast, urgent. The figures didn't bother hiding now. They were running, not toward the road, not toward the shed, but straight into the cornfield. The police pounded on the front door a moment later. "Sheriff's Department! Aaron, you can come out!" My legs barely held me as I left the laundry room. The officers swept through the house, flashlight in hand, calling clear on each room. When they reached the sliding door, they paused. One officer crouched down, studying the glass. "That circle. You didn't touch this?" "No," I whispered. Someone was looking inside. Outside, the yard showed nothing. The storm had eaten every footprint. "Tracks should be everywhere," the deputy said, frowning. "Even in snow like this." "They ran into the cornfield," I insisted. He shook his head. "We checked. Couldn't find so much as a broken stalk." The empty yard felt like a threat all by itself. I didn't sleep at all that night, even with 2 officers parked outside until sunrise. My body felt wired, like fear had settled deep in my bones. I kept replaying the image of that clear circle on the glass, so perfect, so human, so close. The next morning, my aunt flew home early. The moment she hugged me, I broke down, all the adrenaline I'd held inside spilling out in one overwhelming rush. "You're not staying another night here," she said immediately. "Absolutely not." I packed my things with shaky hands. Every window felt like a set of eyes. Every shadow felt too deep. Even the daylight couldn't soften the memory of those figures watching from the yard. A neighbor stopped by later that afternoon, having heard the police were out the previous night. He was an older man, soft-spoken, the kind who'd lived beside that cornfield his whole life. "You're not the first to see them," he said quietly. "Tall men, dark coats, out by the fields at night. Nobody knows who they are. They don't come close to most houses." He paused, eyes drifting to the sliding door. "But sometimes they do." My aunt stood protectively between us, one hand on my shoulder. "We're moving," she said. "This place is going on the market." I didn't argue. I didn't even look back when we drove away. Some places don't want you there. Some warnings you don't question. And I was never going to set foot in that house, or that field, again. I didn't move into the old Victorian to find myself. I moved in because I had nowhere else to go. After weeks of arguing with my family, shouting matches that drained the air from every room, I grabbed whatever fit into my car and drove until I couldn't anymore. That's how I ended up at the pale blue house on Linden Street, a 3-story Victorian that had been chopped into rental units by a landlord who looked permanently tired. "It creaks a lot at night," he told me as he handed over the keys. "Old bones. Don't let it freak you out." My new apartment sat on the top floor, tucked under slanted ceilings. The place smelled faintly of warm dust and lemon cleaner. I tried to feel grateful. I tried to breathe, but that first night, during a February storm that rattled the windows like someone knocking to be let in, the house felt less like a home and more like a large, restless animal. Creaks came from everywhere, floorboards, walls, even the radiator that clanged like a metal heartbeat. I told myself I could handle it. I needed to handle it. The vent near my bed, though, that was different. It started with faint clicking, like someone gently tapping a pencil on the metal. Then a soft, rhythmic puff of air, too steady to be random drafts. I pulled my blanket up and whispered, "Just settling sounds, just settling," but then something whispered back. A clear, breathy voice drifting through the vent. "I see you." I froze. The storm outside kept howling, but everything inside me went dead still. I waited for laughter or more voices, some other tenant messing around. Nothing. Then came the scratching. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a raccoon got into the ducts. Maybe the neighbor downstairs was messing with the vents. I pressed my ear close to the metal. Scratch, 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 long and deliberate, traveling from one end of the vent to the other. It sounded like fingernails dragging slow trails through dust and rust. My skin prickled. "Knock it off," I shouted, and smacked the vent with my palm. Silence. I exhaled shakily and climbed back into bed, angry at myself for getting spooked so quickly. I stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds until sleep finally tugged me under. It couldn't have been more than an hour later when I woke to a noise that punched straight through my half-dreaming haze. Crawling. Something was inside the ventilation system, dragging itself through the narrow ductwork. The sound was awful. Knees scraping metal, elbows thudding, a slow, uneven shuffle like someone forcing themselves forward inch by inch. My digital clock glowed 2:14 a.m. I whispered, "No, no, no, no." The crawling stopped directly above my bed. A cold draft slid through the room even though the heat was off, lifting the hair on my arms. Then, with a soft metallic creak, the vent cover above me flexed. A hand slid through the grate. Small, pale, gray-tinted. Dust coated its impossibly thin fingers, each one bony and wrong, like the joints were reversed. The hand gripped the metal edges and began to pry, lifting the cover bit by bit with slow, patient effort. My scream caught in my throat. I stumbled out of bed and bolted into the living room, shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone as I dialed 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" My voice broke. "Someone's in my vents. Someone's in my apartment. Please, please send someone." The dispatcher asked for my address, my name, whether I could lock myself somewhere safe. I told her I was behind the couch. I didn't dare turn on the lights. The vent in my bedroom made a metallic bang, something heavy dropping onto the floor. Then came footsteps. Soft. Slow. Unhurried. Like the thing that had crawled through the ducts now walked upright. Each step was measured, almost curious. Brushing through the dust I hadn't noticed on the floor earlier. My apartment grew colder. The kind of cold that slipped through your ribs and stayed there. I clamped a hand over my mouth as the footsteps wandered toward the living room. They stopped inches from me, just on the other side of the couch. I could hear it breathing, not like a person. Too long, too wet, like it was trying to inhale the entire room at once. It sniffed, once, twice, searching. Then, from the front door, came pounding police, knocking hard enough to shake the walls. The footsteps vanished, not ran, not retreated, vanished. The cold faded with them, like the temperature itself, followed the thing wherever it went. "Ma'am, we're coming in." The door swung open, and 3 officers swept through the apartment with flashlights drawn. What they found made my blood run colder than anything I'd heard in the vents. The vent cover in my bedroom ripped partly off, dust coating the floor in thick trails, long scratches in the wood far too long for any person, but nothing alive in sight. I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket while the police continued checking every inch of the place. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the warm mug of water they gave me. Officer Ramirez knelt in front of me. "You're safe now. There's no intruder here." I almost laughed. It came out more like a choke. There was something in my vents. It touched the grate. It dropped into my room. I heard it walking. He exchanged a look with his partner. They'd clearly seen the scratches and the dust trails. They just didn't know what to do with them. My landlord arrived 20 minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. When he saw the torn vent, his whole face tightened, not with surprise, but with recognition. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I followed him into the hallway. The storm outside rattled the windows again. He sighed. "I should have told you more when you moved in. Nobody stays in that unit long." My stomach twisted. "Why?" "The original owner," he said, lowering his voice, "was found dead in the ducts in the 1970 seconds. A mental health crisis. He crawled in during a breakdown and got stuck. They didn't find him for days." I felt bile rise in my throat. "Ever since," he continued, "tenants claim they hear movement in the vents, whispers at night. Some say they wake up to see the grate bent or fingernail marks around the screws. I never believed any of it." He glanced toward my bedroom. "Until now." I stared at him, stunned. "You rented it to me anyway?" He swallowed. "People need places to stay. And it never gets violent. Just restless." A cold shiver ran down my spine. Restless felt like the wrong word entirely. An officer stayed with me while I packed. I didn't argue, didn't hesitate. I just threw everything I owned into 2 garbage bags and a duffel. The apartment felt wrong now, like the air itself was holding its breath. When I stepped into the bedroom one last time, the vent hung half open, dust still drifting from the opening. A faint track, almost like a handprint, smudged the wall beneath it. I didn't look closer. The officer followed me out, closing the door behind us. My landlord stood in the hallway, wringing his hands. "I'm sorry," he said softly. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. I didn't trust anything about that house. Outside, the storm had eased, but the wind still rushed through the trees like whispering voices. I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. As I pulled away, I glanced back at the top floor window. For a split second, I thought I saw movement behind the blinds, a shifting shadow, something small slipping back into the vent. My chest tightened. I didn't look again. The landlord later emailed me, saying he planned to leave the apartment vacant indefinitely. "Some places aren't meant to be lived in," he wrote. He was right. Some places keep their dead too close. And some things never stop crawling. When your instincts warn you, listen. Fear is not a flaw, it's a survival tool. Protect yourself, speak up, and walk away from places or people that make you feel unsafe. You never owe your safety to silence. When I first moved into the cabin, the silence felt like a blessing. After years of city noise, sirens, shouting neighbors, garbage trucks at dawn, I thought isolation would be the cure for my burned-out brain. The rental listing had called it a peaceful forest retreat. That was true, I guess, depending on your definition of peaceful. The nearest grocery store was 30 minutes away. My closest neighbor lived down a dirt road so overgrown I wasn't sure anyone actually lived there. Still, the place had charm. An old wood stove, pine walls that smelled like sap, and a deck that creaked under the weight of snow. My new remote job let me work from anywhere, and I wanted to believe this was my fresh start. The first 2 nights were fine, cold, quiet, uneventful. I read books by lantern light when the power flickered, listened to the forest breathing through the pines, tried to convince myself that the loneliness was good for me. Everything changed on night 3. Around 1 a.m., I was on the couch, halfway through a mystery novel, when I heard footsteps outside. Heavy, deliberate, crunching across the frosted needles. People don't walk out here at night. Animals do. And animals, especially bears, don't care about personal space. I turned off the lamp, sat completely still, and let my eyes adjust. That's when I saw a silhouette rise behind the kitchen window. A person tall, impossibly thin. I froze, book slipping from my hand. Then the head tilted. Too far. So far it looked broken. And I understood immediately. This was not a person. The silhouette didn't move at first. It just stood there, pressed against the moonless dark beyond the window. My cabin lights were off, so I knew whoever or whatever was out there shouldn't have been able to see me clearly. But it tapped anyway. A crisp, deliberate tap. Tap. I swallowed hard, reaching for my phone. The screen lit up, but the keypad froze. Every time I tried to dial 911, the phone glitched, white lines streaking across the display like static. It had never done that before. I forced myself to look at the window again. A thin cloud drifted past the stars, letting a faint trace of light spill through the trees. For one awful second, the shape outside became clear. A man, or something shaped like one. Its arms bent backward at the elbows, hanging at angles that made my stomach lurch. Its legs bowed in directions no joints should allow. But the worst part, the part that made my throat close, was its face. The thing stood with its back to the glass, yet its face, twisted around, rotated too far, stared directly at me with a wide, unnatural smile. The teeth were sharp, uneven, like they'd been filed by hand. My breath hitched. The smile widened. Then the thing began to move, not walking forward, but sliding sideways in these jerky, unnatural motions, like its limbs were being operated by broken puppet strings. It disappeared from the kitchen window. A second later, it appeared at the living room window, then the bedroom, then the sliding door. Too fast, too silent, too wrong. I slammed the curtains shut and backed away, my heart hammering so hard the whole cabin seemed to pulse with it. I needed somewhere to hide. I ducked into the pantry, the only room without a window, and shut the door quietly, trying not to breathe too loudly. The space was small, boxed in by shelves and cool, dusty air. My phone still refused to work, flickering like a dying firefly. Outside, the creature dragged something sharp along the cabin's siding, scratching slowly, testing the walls. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would lose interest. But the sound didn't fade. Then everything went quiet. At first, I thought maybe it had left. That maybe, against all odds, the thing had lost track of me. Then the attic creaked. Not the soft settling of wood. No, this was weight. Slow, uneven weight pressing into the beams above my head. My breath froze in my lungs. It was inside. I heard its steps, bones cracking, joints popping with each movement as it dragged itself across the attic floor. The creature moved like it had too many limbs, and none of them worked right. Something scraped against the pantry ceiling, then silence again. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. Footsteps landed outside the pantry. Close. Too close. A shadow passed under the door, long and distorted, legs bending backward like a deer that had been turned inside out. The creature sniffed loudly, dragging air through those jagged teeth. I clamped my hand over my mouth, terrified even a single breath would give me away. The scratching started at the bottom of the door, tracing the wood grain. Slow, curious, patient. Then suddenly, nothing. The air went still. The cabin went silent. I didn't move. Not until morning light seeped through the cracks in the curtains. The moment I stepped out of the pantry, I felt like I'd aged years. I kept expecting to see the creature standing in the corner of the room, joints twisted, head rotated too far. But the cabin looked empty. Wrong, but empty. Sunrise filtered through the curtains in pale, forgiving stripes. I moved slowly, checking each room. What I found made my stomach churn. Deep gouges along the window frames, far deeper than any person could have made without tools. Scratches cut across the siding outside, long and looping as though the creature had dragged its fingers lazily along the walls. The attic ladder was slightly lowered. I hadn't touched it, ever. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and nothing else. My hands shook so badly I dropped my coat twice before finally getting out the front door. The cabin stood behind me like a hollow shell, wounded and watching. I drove straight to the ranger station the moment I hit the main road. A ranger named Sullivan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he rubbed his jaw and said, "Locals have seen something out there. Tall, wrong-looking, walks strange." My skin prickled. "You're not the first," he added quietly. He didn't look surprised, just tired. He told me some people called it the backward man, a thing that moved like it was trying to imitate humans but didn't understand how. "Folks who see him never stay long," Sullivan said, "and they always leave something behind." "What do you mean?" I asked. He looked at me seriously. "You left more than your belongings in that cabin. You left your attention. He won't get that again." I didn't go back. I left Oregon that same afternoon, driving until the trees thinned and the world felt normal again. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't stop to breathe. I didn't stop for gas until my car nearly stalled. Every time I blinked, I pictured that smile too wide, too sharp, too wrong, and the way it circled my cabin like it already knew the layout, as if it had been waiting for someone to move in, waiting for me. The police later contacted me, confirming what they found at the cabin: gouges in the ceiling beams, scratches near every entry point, shredded curtain rods, no footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing to suggest a human intruder. I didn't need their confirmation. I knew what I saw. I moved into an apartment in the city, surrounded by people, noise, lights, things that feel human. But some nights, around 1 a.m., when the world outside gets quiet, I swear I hear faint tapping from the fire escape. Once, twice. Like something is reminding me it remembers. I keep the curtains closed. I keep my lights bright. And I never, ever, look out the window after dark. Some things in the woods aren't meant to be seen, and some things don't forget the people who see them. My name's Jordan, and until last winter, I worked the 11 p.m., 7 a.m. shift at a Walmart in rural Nebraska. People joke that the night shift is easy, just restocking shelves and dodging the occasional weirdo at 3 a.m. But the truth is, something happens to that building after closing. When the last customer leaves and the doors lock, the store feels too big, too hollow. Like every aisle stretches farther than it should, sounds echo wrong, shadows move in ways they shouldn't. Still, I needed the paycheck, so I learned to ignore the uneasy feeling. Most nights were nothing more than boredom, fluorescent lights, and endless carts of freight. But the night the blizzard hit, everything changed. The storm rolled in around 9 p.m., dumping snow thick enough to swallow headlights. By the time the district manager called, it was clear we weren't getting home anytime soon. "Stay put," he said. "We'll check on you in the morning." Most of the staff didn't even try to come in. It was just me, Angela, at the register, and Carl, the janitor who lived off instant ramen and conspiracy radio. "Gonna be a rough night," Carl muttered as he pushed his mop bucket toward the back rooms. Angela just shrugged, scrolling through her phone. Around 1:45 a.m., the lights flickered. Half the store went dark, leaving everything drowned in dim emergency red glow. No skylight shadows, no sense of direction, just that cavernous silence you get in places too big for 3 people. I was zoning the cereal aisle when the intercom crackled. "Jordan, aisle 4. Static swallowed the rest. Angela swore she didn't touch the system. Carl wasn't even near the registers, so who the hell said my name? I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward aisle 4. My first thought was that maybe someone slipped in before closing or hid in the bathrooms. Homeless folks sometimes tried that during storms. I wasn't scared, just annoyed, until I turned the corner. A single shopping cart sat perfectly centered in the aisle, dead center, like someone had measured the distance from each shelf. The cart was half full: paper towels, a wrench, a Christmas pillow, tortilla chips, a single baby shoe. None of it made sense together, but what froze me were the wheels. They were wet, dripping, snowmelt pooled beneath them. Nobody came in wet. The doors were locked. That cart did not belong there. I backed away and went to the nearest terminal to pull up the cameras. The feed glitched, rolling static across the screen. For a split second, just long enough to register, a tall figure stood at the very edge of aisle 4, leaning just enough around the corner that I could see the outline of a hooded head. Then the screen cut to black. "Angela, call the police," I yelled across the store. She tried. The phone line was dead. The storm had taken it out. Then all the emergency lights shut off. Pitch black swallowed every aisle. Somewhere deep in the store, something fell, then something else, then a heavy crash that rattled the metal shelves. The footsteps that followed weren't human. Long strides, too fast. Angela screamed. Carl radioed me, voice shaking. Something knocked over the mop bucket. "I think there's someone back here." Then the intercom clicked again. "Jordan. Behind you." I spun around so fast I slipped on the tile. No one was there, but we were not alone. My flashlight beam shook as I swept it across the cosmetics aisle. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no. A tall figure stood at the far end of the aisle, motionless, wrapped in a dark parka that sagged strangely, as if the person inside wasn't shaped the way a person should be. The hood hung low, too heavy, as though something weighed it down. He didn't move, didn't even sway. He just stood there watching me. "Sir?" I whispered, even though every instinct screamed to run. When lightning flashed through the front doors, the whole store lit up for half a second. That second was enough. The figure was now 15 feet closer. Same posture, same stillness. But the hood tilted, and inside it wasn't a face. It was a smear, like someone had dragged a wet cloth across a photograph, just dark pits where eyes should be, glistening like something alive inside them. I stumbled backward. Angela, Carl, get to the dairy cooler now. We ran. The footsteps behind us didn't sound like running, they sounded like sliding. Fast, smooth, wrong. The dairy cooler door slammed shut just as something slammed into it from the other side. Steel bent inward with each hit. Angela cried, knees pulled to her chest. Carl whispered prayers between panicked breaths. The pounding grew harder, then slower, then stopped altogether. We held our breath. Minutes passed. Silence. I didn't trust it. None of us did. We waited in the suffocating cold, listening for anything beyond the humming cooler fans. Nothing. Not until dawn. At exactly 7:02 a.m., the managers unlocked the front doors from outside, their voices muffled through the store speakers. Overnight crew. Anyone here? We burst out of the cooler, shaking so badly the manager thought we were having some kind of breakdown. Angela clung to me. Carl kept glancing over his shoulder like something might still be lurking behind the pallets. "You three look like hell," the assistant manager said. Then she saw the store. Aisles knocked over, shelves bent, products scattered across the floor like something had torn through the place in a frenzy. Deep gouges in the tile, straight lines, curved lines, sharp arcs that looked almost deliberate. Wet footprints, bare feet, long, narrow prints, led from frozen foods to toys, then into the wall. Not beside the wall, into it, as if the person stepped through solid structure. Who else was here? The store manager demanded. No one, I said. Just us. He didn't believe us. Not until we checked the cameras. Almost every file was corrupted, static, black screens, distorted frames, all except one, a still image. Me standing in aisle 4, and behind me, inches away, the hooded figure, blurred face, dark pits for eyes, head tilted at an impossible angle. Managers stared at the screen in dead silence. Finally, one whispered, "What is that?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that thing had been close enough to touch me. I quit on the spot. So did Angela. Carl never returned either. I expected nightmares after what happened, but what I got was worse. Every time I pass that Walmart, whether in daylight or dusk, the automatic doors slide open even when no one is near them. Managers say it's a glitch. Just the sensors misfiring, they claim. But I've seen those doors open before. At 4 a.m., for the hooded man with the blurred face. I moved 3 towns over. I started a new job. I try not to think about that night. But sometimes, when winter storms roll through and the sky turns the same dead gray as that morning, I swear I hear the intercom crackle in my memory. Jordan, aisle 4. I tell myself it's just trauma, just my mind replaying the worst shift of my life. But deep down, I know better. Things happened in that store that defy explanation. Those footprints weren't human. That face, if you can call it a face, wasn't human. And something about the way it moved. Sliding, appearing closer each time the lights flickered. No living body moves like that. Some nights, when the wind is loud enough to drown the world out, I hear tapping on my apartment window. Soft at first. Tap. Pause. Tap. Like someone reminding me they remember. Like someone waiting to be invited in. I keep the blinds shut. I don't look outside after midnight. And I don't walk down retail aisles alone. Ever again. When your instincts scream that something is wrong, listen. Fear exists for a reason, and ignoring it can put you closer to danger than you ever imagined. Never dismiss your intuition. It might be the only thing standing between you and something you were never meant to see. I wasn't supposed to take the late bus. I had left work early, grabbed dinner on the way out, and planned to walk home before the storm rolled in. But the sky cracked open sooner than the forecast predicted, and within minutes the sidewalks flooded. I wasn't in the mood to swim 3 miles home, so I ducked under the cracked plastic bus shelter and waited. That's when I noticed him. A man sat alone on the bench, lean, soaked, wearing a jacket at least 2 sizes too big, the sleeves hanging past his fingers. He didn't check the bus schedule or look at the road. He stared at me, blinking in slow, stiff motions like each blink was something he had to remind himself to do. I tried not to make eye contact, but it's hard to ignore someone staring straight at you. When the bus finally arrived, the headlights cutting through the rain like knives, I hurried on. He didn't move, didn't make an attempt to board. He just mouthed something as I passed him. No sound, just lips forming deliberate shapes. I thought he said, I'll be there soon. Weird. Sure, but bus stops attract weird. The ride home was uneventful. My clothes dripped everywhere, my shoes squelched, and the heater barely worked. When I finally reached my apartment, I microwaved a cup of noodles, watched a few stupid videos, and fell asleep on the couch with the TV still glowing. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up, not from a nightmare, from tapping, slow, steady, not on the door, on the living room window. At first, I assumed the storm had rattled a branch loose and the wind was pushing it against the glass. I sat there for a moment, heart drumming, listening. The tapping wasn't random. It had rhythm. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. I stood up, wiped the fog from the window, and pulled the curtain back. A wet handprint dragged down the outside of the glass, long, pale fingers, smearing through the condensation. I stumbled backward so fast I knocked over the lamp. "What the hell?" I whispered, grabbing my phone. Right then, the power cut out. My apartment and the entire neighborhood collapsed into darkness. Lightning flashed and briefly lit up the street. In that split-second burst of white light, I saw him, the bus stop man, standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, facing me, head tilted far too much to one side, like his neck had softened. His arms hung stiff and loose at the same time, a wrongness I can't describe without feeling sick. Lightning flashed again. He was at the edge of my yard. Another flash. He stood at the porch railing. He didn't step. He didn't walk. He just appeared closer each time light hit the world. Then came the tapping again. But this time, it came from inside my house. I froze. The sound was unmistakable. 3 taps, slow and deliberate, on the hallway wall. I backed into the bathroom and locked the door. The knob jiggled immediately, twisting with enough force to warp the metal. Then a voice, low and watery, seeped through the door. "You shouldn't have looked at me." My hands shook so violently I almost dropped my phone. I texted my friend, "Someone's in my house. Call 911, please." My battery was at 12%, sinking fast. The doorknob twisted again. This time it creaked, metal bending like soft clay. I grabbed a towel bar, pathetic as a weapon, but better than nothing, and backed onto the counter. My reflection in the mirror behind me looked like someone else. Eyes wide, hair sticking to my forehead, breath fogging the glass. Then the sound changed. Slap, slap, a wet dragging noise on the floorboards, something thick and heavy moving along the hallway. I pressed my ear to the door as lightly as I could. Drip, drip, water. Or something like water. Then I saw it. A dark, wet puddle seeping under the bathroom door. It didn't spread like normal liquid, it slid, inching inward like it had a purpose. "No, no, no," I whispered, pulling my feet up as the puddle reached the base of the cabinet. It pooled beneath me, moving as if tasting the air. Sirens finally cut through the storm outside, distant but approaching. The puddle quivered, then slowly drained backward, pulling itself away from the door. The footsteps returned, wet, dragging footsteps moving down the hallway. When the police burst through my front door minutes later, everything went dead silent. They found the back door wide open, rain pouring in, but no footprints, no intruder, just that puddle, evaporating before our eyes. And on the bathroom floor, a soaked bus ticket with a time written on it, 3:17 a.m. tomorrow. I didn't even pack properly. The officers told me it was probably a break-in, that my fear made things seem worse, but they couldn't explain the handprint on the window, or the puddle under the bathroom door, or why I kept smelling rainwater inside my apartment long after it dried. "I'm not staying," I said. "Not after that." One cop nodded like he understood. The other didn't. They offered to patrol the area overnight, but I wasn't sticking around to test fate. I speed-packed a duffel bag, grabbed my wallet and keys, and got into my car. The storm had calmed, leaving everything shiny and black under the streetlights. Before I pulled away, I looked toward my porch. For a second, I could have sworn someone was standing behind the railing, half hidden in shadow. I floored it out of the neighborhood. I crashed on my cousin's couch that night. She kept asking what happened, but I just said, "Someone followed me home." It wasn't a lie. I just didn't tell her he wasn't exactly alive. At 3:17:01, I lay awake on her couch listening to the hum of her fridge. No tapping, no footsteps, no puddles sliding under doors. But as I stared at the ceiling, I felt something sinking into my chest. A sense that the world had tilted, that whatever I'd seen wasn't finished yet. The bus ticket weighed heavy in my pocket. I took it out, The ink had changed. Below 3:17 a.m. tomorrow, another line had appeared. New stop. Wherever you hide. I dropped the ticket and didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I bought a plane ticket one way, as far from Nebraska as I could. I didn't go home to get anything else. I didn't return the keys. I didn't file a notice. I just left. At the airport, I kept scanning the crowd. Every tall man, every soaked jacket, every slow blink. I jumped at reflections in the glass, avoided sitting near the windows. My nerves were fried, but fear keeps you alive, at least that's what I told myself. When my boarding group was called, I practically ran onto the plane. I slumped into the seat and breathed, for the first time in 24 hours, like maybe I was safe. Then the overhead lights flickered, once, twice, the same rhythm as the tapping. I squeezed my eyes shut. It's just bad wiring. It's just your nerves. It's just, the intercom crackled. Not the flight attendant, not the pilot. A low, wet voice whispered through the speakers. I told you. I'd be there soon. I bolted upright. Passengers glanced around, confused. No one else reacted like they heard it. No one looked terrified. No one saw what I saw, a drip of water sliding down the inside of the cabin wall. I pressed the call button and whispered to the attendant, I need off this plane. Please, please let me off. She frowned but let me leave. I didn't argue. I didn't run. I walked out of the airport and into the sunlight like I'd survived an accident nobody else witnessed. I'm still running from that night, but I never take buses, and I never look at strangers for too long. Trust your instincts. The moment something feels wrong, no matter how small, remove yourself. Ignoring fear doesn't make you brave, it just blinds you to danger. Sometimes survival depends on listening to the warnings your mind gives, long before your eyes catch up.